All right. The channel is live. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Adventure on So Many Levels. We're going to play Blades in the Dark.
Oh boy.
I'm Christiana Ellis, and I am usually the dungeon master. But tonight, it's a little different. I'm forgetting the name of what I am in this. I just GM, I guess, game master in this one. But we're going to be doing something a little different tonight. But first, our players: Mark Kilfoyle as Nedry Shiny Rock, aka Indigo.
You know, I've been thinking about being different.
Jenny Meltzer as Zaylene, aka Nightshade.
In the dark, in the shadows.
Paul Fisher as Zinhorn, aka Garland.
What's phase two again?
And last but not least, Starla Hutchton as Carolina, aka Primrose.
I'm used to being other people anyway. Hello, friends.
So, when last we left the Pocket Protectors, they had earned the favor of some Archfey, who gave them as a reward magical new identities which would protect them as they delved down beneath the oceans of the Feywild, looking to obtain a priceless magical artifact from an evil Fey. And these new identities would keep you from losing your current ones to this evil Fey. But beyond that, all it shields who you are and your intentions, but you're still going to have to figure out how to actually get the thing. And so, because we are setting up in story what is effectively a heist, I thought it would be interesting for us to change up our game system a little bit and play a game that is designed to be all about heists, which is Blades in the Dark by John Harper. I think. Did I get that right? I believe that's right. Yes. Okay. And so this is a pretty neat game that has a fairly different mechanic system to that when compared to Dungeons and Dragons. But I think we're going to have a lot of fun learning the system and adapting the characters. So, what are we doing? We're going to, in this session, adapt and figure out how to make our current D&D characters into Blades in the Dark characters. So this is going to be an unusual session in that regard. We're going to be talking a lot about game mechanics and abilities and that sort of thing, less so in the fiction of the story. But we're doing it because I think it's going to, for this next arc of the story, give us a kind of interesting new tone and give us some mechanics to make this arc stand out in a way that it might not otherwise. And so, with all that addressed, let's talk a little bit about what is Blades in the Dark. Like, how does this game work? How is it different from D&D? One of the first ways that it's different is that it is very fiction first when compared to D&D. What that means is that while Dungeons and Dragons gives you this character sheet that has a lot of different abilities on it and spells that you can cast and weapons that you can use and so on, those it becomes in some ways a list of things you can do. But the intention with Blades in the Dark is to start with the fiction version of it. So instead of saying, I'm going to go and I'm going to cast this spell, or I'm going to attack with my rapier, what you would say is, I'm going to slink through the shadows and use my magical abilities to conjure or I jump up and I slide across the polished floor and stab up with my rapier at the key moment to get him in the butt. That sort of thing. Like, the idea is that you describe how you're doing it as though we're watching the movie or the TV show of it. And then once you have described what you are trying to do, we will figure out what the role is for it. Now, it's not entirely unlike D&D in the sense that you do have like attributes that govern how good you are at some kinds of things versus other things. You do have abilities, but they are all designed more around the idea of you say what it is that you're trying to do, and then we figure out what category it belongs in. And you could try for any particular obstacle, just like in D&D, you can try to approach it however you like, but depending on which approach you choose, it might have greater or lesser effect. So that's the basic idea. So let's talk about when you're making these moves. The action roll, instead of rolling a d20 and then adding some modifier number to it like you do in Dungeons and Dragons, instead, based on your attributes, you are rolling a certain number of d6s. So if you have no action dots in a given attribute, if you would essentially be rolling 0, you would roll 2d6 and take the lower one. If you have 1, you roll 1. If you have 2, you roll 2, and then you would take the higher. And in every case, no matter how many d6 you're rolling, if you get, you're looking to see what is the highest number of all of them. If the highest number is a 6, it means great, you got a great success. It worked just like you wanted. If you manage to get more than 1 6, it's a critical, even better, right? If you get a 4 or a 5, it is a mixed success. Like you probably got it, but there's some kind of a complication that we will figure out what it is. If you get a 1 through a 3, it was a failure, and you're going to have some sort of consequence as a result. And so obviously, the more d6 you are rolling, the better your odds to get a higher number as the top result, right? Does that all kind of make sense, broadly speaking? Okay. The other piece of every given roll is what is the position and effect matrix, which is to say, every time you are making a roll, we decide whether you are acting in a controlled position, a risky position, or a desperate position. And that's entirely based on the fiction, right? And so if, for example, you're trying to track someone and then from across the street, and there's lots of shadows and lots of rooftops for you to crawl across, and it makes perfect sense in the fiction that it would be very easy to stay hidden while you follow this person, then we would probably say that what you're doing is in a controlled situation, right? Because even if it went wrong, you just slip back into the shadows again, right? No harm, right? Like maybe they turn around, but you're like, whoa, that was close, because you're in a controlled situation. Risky might be like you're following them on the street, whereas if you mess up, the odds of them seeing and getting spooked or turning and firing an arrow at you or something is higher, right? Whereas desperate might be like you're literally in a foot chase, right? Like they are, you could lose them or something terrible could happen at any moment. The basic way that it works out, and this is on page 23 of the PDF if you're looking at that, so is that if you're in controlled, you act on your terms, you exploit a dominant advantage. Risky, you go hand to hand, you act under fire, you take a chance. Desperate is you overreach your capabilities, you're in serious trouble. And basically, depending on which position you are in, what are the consequences of getting a failure on the roll matters, right? So if you're in a controlled position, the consequences are low. If you're in a desperate position, the consequences of failing are high. Straightforward. Then we're also looking at the effect, which is to say that there is either a limited effect, a standard effect, or a great effect. And that means that essentially, like if we're ticking clocks I guess I was talking about clocks off the stream. I didn't mention it so far, but we can often you are when you go to defeat an enemy. I'll come back to clocks, but the point is that a great effect. You know, you're going to get more result from what you were trying to do. Limited result. You know, like it kind of works. It helps a little bit, but it's not as much as you might have wanted. Standard is in the middle, of course, right? So you have a whole matrix where you could end up in a situation where, you know, you're in a desperate position, but you could get a great result. Or it could be, you know, you're in a controlled position, but you're only going to get a limited result, right? So we establish all of that. Every time you're making a roll, you will know before you roll what position and what effect. And so, for example, depending on how you approach something, I might say, well, I will let you roll that because you want to do that because that's something you're better at. But I think that's going to be a limited effect compared to if you were doing a different approach that I thought would be more effective, you might get a better effect, right? So it's based on the fictional circumstances, adjudicated by me. All right. And so every time you're rolling, you know, you're going to assemble the number of dice based on your attributes and based on any other bonuses that will come into. We'll talk a little bit about where those would come into later. And you know the position effect matrix. You roll the d6s. Whatever the highest number is dictates the how you did. Any questions about that?
Nope.
Okay. So, if you get a failure, or for that matter, even a mixed success, there's going to be consequences of the action. It's also perhaps worth noting that in this game, I do not roll dice for the enemies. You roll dice, and so instead, if I were to say an enemy is coming after you with a sword, you are determining with your roll how you respond to that. And so if you get a failure, the enemy is going to land their attack, right? And so that's how that works. Instead of me rolling, it is always the PCs that roll. But let's say you get a failure when you're trying to evade that attack with the sword. There's going to be consequences that might be different levels of harm. And it might be, you know, something happens in the fiction, and it could be any of those things that I decide are justified based on what happened. So, for example, if you're in a desperate position, the consequences are going to be more severe. It might be a higher level of harm, it might be a more serious thing that happens in the story, etc. But every time that I go to put a consequence into play as the result of a failure or a mixed success, you can resist the consequence. And what that means is that anytime you choose to resist a consequence, it will automatically be lowered one tier. So like if it was going to be a level 3 harm, you can resist it and make it a level 2 harm instead, or a 2 to 1, or a 1 to nothing, right? And then likewise, if it's something in the fiction, then we would kind of, you know, it's more arbitrary, but we would make it a lesser result because you resisted. And in order to do that, in order to resist those consequences, you're spending stress, which in some ways is the closest analog to your hit points in this game. When you spend stress to resist a consequence, you're going to roll 1d6 unless you have an ability that changes it. And you subtract the number you rolled from 6. So you say 6 minus the result of 1 die, and that's how many stress you take. So for example, if you want to resist a consequence and you roll a 6 on that die, you don't take any stress at all. But if you only roll a 1, you're taking 5 stress. And you only have, I think, 9 or 10 on your sheet. So 5 stress would be a lot, right? And so in some cases, you really have to decide whether it's more important to try to resist a consequence, or can you spare the stress? Right?
How often does stress refresh?
It refreshes only when you have finished a score and you do a downtime.
Okay.
In fact, it does not automatically refresh at all. You have to do downtime activities in order to remove the stress. The other way that you can remove stress is by filling up the stress track, at which point you are taken out of the scene, meaning it doesn't mean you're dead, but it means you're no longer able to help everyone else in that scene, and we would come up with a fictional reason why. And then you would take a scar, which is something that is entirely based on role play. You would decide how to role play that scar. So when your character comes back, they are now free of stress, but they have this emotional or physical scar, depending on what you decide to take. And generally speaking, that would be your choice. And so ideally, you would want to avoid taking scars, because in principle, the way a character dies in this is that either they take a level 4 harm and can't heal it and can't resist it, or they have, if they have 4 scars already and would have to take a new one, they essentially have to retire. You know, like they might not be dead, but like they can't continue on. And so that's the basic idea, is that when you fail or when you get a mixed success in a result, there's going to be a consequence. And you can always choose to either accept the consequence or resist it. Resisting it costs stress. Make sense? All right. So next is things like teamwork. Like, how do you work together? You all are making your own roles. We decide entirely based on the fiction who is doing what roles and when. There's not any standard initiative, although generally speaking, I'm going to be trying to make sure that everybody is getting a chance to do cool stuff. But as far as teamwork is concerned, this also means that we don't have to say, oh, well, Indigo wants to do something with Garland, but his turn is later. Instead, it would just be if the two of you are in the same area and it makes sense that you could do something together, you just do it, right? And we would decide all of that as a group. So assisting is pretty straightforward, is that anytime that you are wanting to make a roll and one of the other PCs wants to help you, and it makes sense in the fiction that they could, they spend 1 stress, and the person making the roll gets to roll 1 more die. So that's how that works. I didn't mention it earlier, but there's a couple of other things that you can do when you're making a roll to get more dice. One is you can push yourself, which is to spend stress to get 1 more dice. So like, let's say, let me pull this page up. So when you are spending stress, so when you push yourself, you can mark 2 stress, and you can choose whether that adds 1d6 to your roll, or you can make your effect 1 level better. Like if I told you this move was going to give you only a limited effect, you can push yourself to make it have a standard effect instead. Or vice versa, you can take action when you might otherwise be incapacitated. I was thinking that you can also change your position, but I guess that's not in the rules for that. And then one last way to get an extra die is what's known as the devil's bargain, which is basically you say, I want another die for this roll, and I tell you, okay, you can have one, but if I give it to you, this other thing is going to happen. And then it's entirely up to you whether you decide that's worth it or not. Right? And my job for those is going to try to tempt you with things that, you get the extra die in this roll, so maybe it goes great, and then you can deal with that other problem when it comes up. But, it might cause some other difficulty, right? And so that's the idea there. So you can, when you're putting together your dice, you start with your attribute scores. If you have a special ability that would give you a bonus, is someone helping you? Do you push yourself? Do you want a devil's bargain? lots of different ways to assemble that dice pool. But there's also what's known as the group action, which is a great solution to a constant problem in D&D, which is to say, you are all stealthing into an area. Do I have all of you roll stealth? If so, like, what happens if one person gets a 1? Does that automatically mean the group fails? Well, it seems like someone who's better in the group ought to be able to help that person, but like, how do you adjudicate all that? So a group action in this game, what that does is all of you roll, and then the final result for the group is the best result out of everybody. So let's say all of you roll only 1s except for one of you rolls a 6. That means the result is a 6. However, whoever chose to be the leader of that group action is going to take a point of stress for every character that failed. So if you are all trying to do a group action to stealth, and let's say Nightshade was leading the action, and Nightshade got a 6 and everyone else got all 1s, then you succeed with the 6 is the result, but Nightshade takes 3 stress because the 3 of you failed. Does that make sense? That's how group actions work. And basically, group action is going to be any time that you are all trying to do something together. And it could just be like even just 2 people trying to do it together, right? Like if, for example, you're trying to hold a door closed, right? If there's 2 people doing it and one person is strong and the other person is weak, you can make that a group action instead of trying to, do it something more or more careful, or instead of having you both roll or something like that. Okay, and then protect is something that you can do is if it makes sense in the fiction. This is another way to deal with consequences, is that if we've got it like an incoming harm for one character, you could potentially have another character protect them by moving in and essentially taking that consequence for them. But of course, that would be dependent on it making sense in the fiction for them to be able to do that. And the setup action is essentially like if you were to say, I want to shove this guy over so that so-and-so has a better ability to stab them, then you would do your move, but the result would be to create a circumstance that gives the other player either more dice or a better position or a better effect. And that's how all of that works. So that's the basics of how moves work in this game. Any questions so far? I know we're covering a lot of stuff. It's also, I think, gonna make more sense once we start doing it a little more. But any questions? All right.
No, none yet.
Okay. The next is how does gear work in this? And this is something that I think is going to be important for how we approach, creating the Blades in the Dark versions of your characters. Because instead of trying to figure out, like, okay, well, you gave Ivy the Wand of Pyrotechnics, how does that work in this game? Well, what we could just do is we could try to figure out, Ivy wouldn't be rolling anyway because she's going to be like an NPC. But the point being, if you have a magic item, we will figure out what the role is for it. But when you are in this circumstance, like if once again we're going to return to the idea, what's the fiction here, is that it may be that as this group of famous adventurers who have now been granted these magical secret identities, maybe you don't want to just stroll into town looking like a high-level team of adventurers, right? It's going to attract a lot of attention. And attention from someone who is perhaps equipped to take high-level steps against you, right? Whereas if you can come in a little more under the radar, maybe you can make some plans, you can get some stuff in place before they take notice of you. And so that's part of how gear works. Anytime we are moving into a score, which we'll talk a little bit more about how that works in a moment, you choose your loadout, which just means are you light, are you medium, or are you heavy in terms of your how much you can carry. And you do not decide in advance what that consists of. You can if you want, but it is to your advantage to not. And so, for example, the Cutter playbook, a light loadout would be 3 for them, a normal would be 5, and 6 would be heavy. But the reason you don't always want to say in advance what it is because when you're in the situation, at any point where you can think of something you have that would be useful, you can then decide to declare that one of your load items is that thing. Right? You don't have to decide in advance. You can choose, well, I want to say retroactively that I knew this thing would come in handy, and so that's why I brought it. And this is, again, the design is to try to prevent having to overplan and, for example, spend ages trying to decide which spells to prepare, right? It's the same general idea of saying, like, instead of having to decide in advance which spells to prepare or which weapons to pack, you are instead choosing to have a certain number of things that you can declare in a moment what they are. But once, for example, you decide, I have, as part of my load, a sword. Now that item is declared, and that is one of the items. You can't undeclare it, right? And then every time we do a new score, that resets. But it's worth noting in the fiction that the difference between choosing light, normal, heavy, why wouldn't you always choose heavy, then you get more stuff, is because it's going to affect how you look and how people treat you, right? If you are as a light loadout, you could pass as just an ordinary individual. You're not doing anything suspicious. Normal is going to look like, oh, well, that's a person who looks like they have stuff that, they could be ready looking for trouble or something. And then heavy is like, oh my gosh, that is a soldier on his way to assault a fort, right? So the idea is you would choose a loadout based on if you're trying to infiltrate somewhere and pretend to be a waiter to get into this dinner party, you probably don't want a heavy load because people are going to immediately say, hey, how come that waiter has plate armor and a broadsword, right? So that's how gear works. And so in this context, each of these Blades in the Dark sheets has like a list of things that it might be. But what I would encourage us is to think of all the various magical items and so on that you have as being like that gear. So those are things that you could declare as gear. And we would have to decide some of them, if they're really big or bulky or obvious, they might have to count as more than 1 point of gear, right? Just as you can see in some of these sheets, for example, if you have regular armor, that would take up 2 points. If you have heavy armor, that would be 3 points of gear, right? But by contrast, because Zinhorn has that special magical armor that is unusual in some ways, we might say that that's an example of heavy armor, but it only takes 2 points because it's special in that way, right? And that's where I think we adjudicate all of the various magic items that you might have, is that you're just going to declare them as gear when fictionally appropriate. Does that make sense? Okay. Next on my little outline here is the idea of cohorts. Cohorts is something in Blades in the Dark. If you're playing it in a standard way, you can recruit sidekicks, you can recruit a gang, and in fact, it's generally the assumption in Blades in the Dark is that you have a crew of which the PCs are only perhaps the high-level members of the crew, which might include gangs or units of individuals, a squad of toughs, and then a specialist lockpicker or something like that. And all of these NPCs that are allied NPCs are what's known as cohorts. And so this is what we're going to do with Evan and Ivy and Buster, is they're going to be cohorts in that way. But one of the things that I think we'll want to talk about moving forward in terms of how your party approaches this whole situation, which you don't have to decide right now, but it may be that you decide that part of the way you want to approach this whole thing is maybe you actually do want to recruit some people to help you out, right? Maybe you feel like you're going to have a better chance if you can find some of the locals to give you some more strength in numbers for some sort of event that you might be planning to do, and that sort of thing. And so all of this is going to come into play. There's different types of crews that you can have, and so there's different crew sheets. And I think I know some of you were looking at some of those, and in particular, one of the types of crews that you can have is cult. But then there's also assassins, shadows, smugglers, etc. And that the basic idea is that when you're choosing a crew, it's like, what is sort of the main thing that your crew does? Now, how much we actually want to use those crew mechanics, I think, will be partly up to you and how you want to approach the whole situation. But again, that's part of the mechanics that are available, and having a crew does provide benefits, right? And so that might be something where you decide we're going to have better luck doing whatever we're trying to do if we had some people helping us out, right? And the crew is different than cohorts. Cohorts are just allied NPCs that are, doing stuff with you, and you can command, or for example, it might be if Garland is saying to Aster, aka Evan, the two of us are assaulting this soldier together, right? The way we would do that is you are making the roll, Paul, for the both of you, but because you have an ally, a cohort helping you, I would probably say if you would normally have standard effect by yourself, you would have great effect. Or maybe instead of it being a desperate situation, it would only be a risky situation because you have help, right? That's
Right.
how the cohorts will help. In these various circumstances is they change the fiction, which is what dictates whether what position and what effect your rolls are going to have. Okay, so we talked a little bit about cohorts and a little bit about crews. Now, scores is the idea of a lot of the time in the game, you're going to be in what's free play, and that would be normally the way you would consider all of D&D. It's essentially you're going around, you're having whatever conversations you want to have, you're making rolls when appropriate, and so on. But when you're ready to do a score, which is like, one of these heist jobs, but it doesn't have to be a heist, it could be any sort of objective. The way that works is you can do some preparatory work where you're like gathering information, and decide, learning about the situation. But then you're going to do the engagement roll. And the engagement roll is you're going to choose what approach you want to use. And let's see, let me pull up this list. The engagement rolls. Also tell my air conditioner to stop blowing the fan. Okay. So the engagement roll is, a score will fall into one of three categories. It is a criminal activity determined by your crew type, for example, or seizing a claim from your crew's claim map, or a special mission or goal determined by players, right? It could be any of those things. So there's the planning would be, if you're gathering information or you're doing some other sort of thing that you want to do in order to get to prepare or get information. But generally speaking, you're not going to do a ton of that. We might have like one move for each of you, right? But then when the time is right to do the engagement roll, you're going to say, well, what is the basic approach that you're wanting? Is it an assault? Is it a deception? Stealth? Occult? Which in our case would be like magic, right? Social or transport. And depending on which one you do, it's basically saying like what's the theme, what's the general vibe of how you want this thing to go. And then you're going to choose a detail, which is usually based on results of your gather information rolls, where this is again just sort of saying like if so if you want to choose a stealth mission, the goal is to trespass unseen, and the detail would be the point of infiltration. You have to figure, in order to do stealth engagement, you have to decide what's the way in, right? And that would be something you might determine through gather information roll. Whereas an assault would be the point of attack, deception would be the method of deception, social would be who is the social connection that gets you in, that sort of thing. And then when you're doing the engagement roll, it works very much like any of the other moves, but we answer a number of questions. So, is the operation particularly bold or daring? If so, you get one die. Or you start with one. And so if it's bold or daring, you get one, you gain one and have two. But is the operation overly complex or contingent on many factors? You remove one. Does the plan's detail expose a vulnerability of the target or hit them where they're weakest? Add one die. Is the target strongest against this approach, or do they have particular defenses or special preparations? Remove one die. Can friends or contacts help? Are there enemies or rivals? Are there any other elements that you want to consider? Things that might give you more or less dice to roll during the engagement. And then you roll just like any other move based on how many dice you have. And it determines what position you start the engagement in. So, for example, if on a 6 for the engagement roll, you're in a controlled position, it means that essentially that it's working so far. You might have actually already gotten past the first obstacle. No one has spotted you. You're in a good spot, and probably all of your next first moves are going to be in a controlled position unless something changes fictionally that would change that, right? But vice versa, if you get a failure, like a bad result on the engagement roll, it means, oh no, it's going wrong almost immediately. And before you can be in any other situation, you have to deal with whatever this immediate, desperate situation is, right? And starting in a desperate situation means whatever roll that you're going to have to make to address whatever fictional obstacle I've given you is going to start in a desperate position. And then from there, generally speaking, with any score, I'm going to set clocks. And I mentioned these earlier, and I'm coming back to them now. And so, for example, if something is not going to be terribly difficult to do, I might set a 4-tick clock. And what that means is that when you want to try to, to do the thing, you do the move that you think is going to help you with it. And if you get a success with a limited effect, we tick the clock once. If you get a success with a standard effect, we tick it twice. If you get great effect, we tick it 3 times. When the clock is full, you have achieved whatever that was. But you can have bad clocks too. So for example, what it might be is if you've snuck into a darkened mansion at night, right? It might be you have a 4-tick clock to find the room that you're looking for. Then there's also a 4-tick clock of security has noticed you. And so depending on how you roll, you're trying to fill your 4-tick clock and find the room. But if you get failures or even mixed successes, I might have as one of the consequences be that I tick the clock that security is going to notice you. And then if I fill that clock, someone spotted you. And now you have to deal with that. And so, generally speaking, anytime we're doing a score, I will have set some clocks and some situations that determine, when it's done, right? And then we just role play it out until you have filled those clocks or it makes sense in the fiction. And often it'll be the case where, let's say I have set an 8-step clock for something, and it makes sense in the fiction that it seems like it's right there. Shouldn't I just be able to grab it? But if you haven't filled the 8-step clock, that means that I can introduce some other complication. You're still going to have to get to that 8-step clock before you can get away with it, even if it looks like it's right there, right? And that's meant to represent the level of difficulty. But otherwise, in a score, you play until you either achieve the outcome or you give up and run away. both of which can happen in this game. It's entirely allowed, just like in D&D. Although in this case, this game is a little bit better suited because of what we described as the way the rules work. That it doesn't have to be the sort of thing like in D&D where running away is hard because if someone rolls low on initiative and everyone else leaves, then that person is left alone with all the guards or whatever, right? So it's meant to be a little bit more straightforward, that if you want to abandon the mission and flee, that is, you still have to make rolls for it, but it's tactically, it's a little easier than in D&D. Okay, and so the last little, basic mechanic that I wanted to just address is factions, or rather downtime, which is that once you have finished a score, we determine the payoff, like what did you get from doing the score if you were successful. We're going to determine how much heat did you attract, like how much attention from the authorities. Were there any entanglements? Like, for example, it might be that there was some other rival gang that also wanted to steal the thing you just stole. And so now that you've got it instead, they've got beef with you, right? So there could be these sorts of entanglements. And then you can do downtime activities, which would include ways that you can remove stress, or ways that you want to improve your situation otherwise, or to try to minimize those, heal an injury, or all of those sorts of things. And we can talk more about the details of that in the future. But so that's downtime. And then the last is factions, which is to say there's different factions in this area, and you might make some mad and some like you. And so that's the basic sort of situation there. We're not using the factions that are from this book because we're in our own setting, but there will be factions. All right, so that's a crash course in the mechanics of Blades in the Dark. So now comes the time that we're going to talk about making your D&D adventurers into Blades in the Dark scoundrels. So we talked a little bit about this off stream, but I think there's kind of two ways for each of you to go here, and you don't all have to choose the same way. One is to say, how can we make your existing character fit into the rules of Blades in the Dark? That's probably harder with the mechanics of Blades in the Dark, but we can do it if that's what feels right to you. Or what we can imagine is that by inhabiting this new identity you've been given by the Archfey, your character is temporarily fitting into one of the Blades in the Dark archetypes, which would make it more straightforward to use one of the playbooks as written instead of adapting it. But we can do either one. And so each of you, I imagine, has been starting to look through the different playbooks and getting a sense of the vibe of each. And just for anyone who doesn't know this game at all, the playbooks are called they're all sort of like Peaky Blinders style jargon, like you've got the cutter or the hound or the leech or the slide or the spider, etc. So those are kind of the basic gang archetypes. Does anyone have one that immediately leaps out at you?
I do.
Do tell.
I think I'm going to go with the Whisper because it's spectral.
Mm-hmm.
You have that option to take the occult attribute so that you can commune with spirits and deities and stuff like that. So it made sense.
Sure. So a Whisper is an arcane adept and channeler. And so the one thing that I'd also just say is, like, all four of your characters in D&D can do magic, right? So just because there's only one playbook here that is like specifically says that it's focused on arcane, right? Remember what we said about how we can adapt any of the stuff that you're doing. And so think of these playbooks more like, what's the archetype? What is the gang role that you're filling? However it is that you would be filling that role. But so in this case, the Whisper would be more focused on specifically these arcane sorts of things, as opposed to perhaps using magic to fill other things, right? So, like for example, the cutter is a dangerous and intimidating fighter. But if you had someone who used a lot of magic, but they used it offensively, we could have someone be a cutter that does it with magic. But in any case, so are you thinking with the whisper that you want to pretty much use it as it is there, or did you
I think I'm going to use it as is
okay?
because I like the idea of adapting sort of these new identities, and that would come with new things.
Okay, so the whisper starts with an action point in study and 2 action points in attune. And so that's, where, that playbook starts with. And so when you are normally making a new character, you would then add 4 more points anywhere you want and choose 1 special ability from the list. And so because you're starting as higher level D&D characters, I think we're going to give you some more advances, but I would encourage you to think about where the starting ones would be and then add the new stuff. Note that when you are resisting a roll, depending on how you are, like what is it that you're resisting, you're going to roll different things. So if you look at the character sheets, you're going to notice that some of the skills, including hunt, study, survey, and tinker, are under insight. And then finesse, prowl, skirmish, wreck are under prowess. Attune, command, consort, and sway are under resolve. And if you look on the sheet, you'll notice how there is a line past that first dot in each row. What that means is that if you have 1 in something, it goes in that first one. If you have 2, it goes in the next one over. But when you say you want to roll insight, you're saying how many of the dots in that first column are filled, right? So if, for example, Jenny, with the whisper thing, you're starting with 2 in attune, that would still only be 1 for resolve, right? But if you were to add 1 more in attune, you would roll 3 for attune, but still only 1 for resolve. But if you added 1 in command instead, then you would have 2 for attune, 1 for command, and 2 for resolve. It's a little bit complicated, but does that make sense to everybody, basically?
Yeah.
And so, like, where those insight, prowess, resolve come into play is that if I tell you that the consequence for your failure was that you get stabbed in the gut with a sword and you want to resist it, you are going to roll prowess to resist it. And so, again, in terms of determining how much stress you take, if you have 2 to roll in prowess, then you have a better chance of rolling higher and taking less stress, right? Whereas if it is something that would be a terrifying ghost that would send you quaking, you would be rolling resolve to resist that, for example. And then, so what you're rolling insight, prowess, or resolve, depending on what makes sense in the circumstances. So in any case, with the whisper, you start with 2 in attune and 1 in study, and you would add 4 anywhere you want, except that to start, you can't have more than 2 in anything. But when you add more, the advanced ones, which we'll do in a moment, then you can have it grow more than 2. But when you're starting, everything has to start at only 2. So I think we'll get everybody to that point before we do the advances, if that makes sense. So you would choose 1 of the special abilities and add 4 dots to what's already there in the playbook. Anyone else have a playbook kind of picked out or thinking about some?
Yeah, I'm thinking about slide.
Okay, I thought that might be the one that was kind of the best fit for you. And so slide starts with two in sway, which makes sense because sway is more or less like persuasion, right? Or sway is persuasion, and then consort. It's interesting to some of the distinction there because let me find the actual places where it describes them in detail, because consort and sway basically it's more like consort is like groups and sway is individuals. I think. Let's see. Yeah, so sway. When you sway, you influence someone with guile, charm, or argument. You might lie convincingly. You might persuade someone to do what you want. You might argue a case that leaves no clear rebuttal. You could try to trick people into affection or obedience, but consorting or commanding might be better. Whereas consort, it says, when you consort, you socialize with friends and contacts. You might gain access to resources, information, people, or places. You might make a good impression or win someone over with your charm and style. You might make new friends or connect with your heritage or background. So, and it's like you could try to direct your friends with social pressure, but commanding might be better. And so you can see how like each of these descriptions, and this is in the chapter 6, so like all of these are in like starting on page 170, it has the detailed explanations of each. So the example there might be if you are one-on-one with someone and you're trying to talk them into something, that's going to be sway. But if what you want instead is, I want to get up on the stage and play my lute and win over the crowd, that's probably consort. Make sense?
I think so.
All right. So then, so the slide, I can't get it to stay on the page that I want. There we are. So yeah, you would start with those two, and then just like with Jenny's, you're going to add 4 more dots anywhere you want, with the exception that no individual skill can be more than 2 to start, and then you're going to choose one of those special abilities. How about you, Paul? Any of those catch your eye?
I was looking at the cutter.
Yeah? Okay. And so cutter starts with 2 in skirmish, which is the main like fighting fighting one, and then 1 in command. And as people start looking at the special abilities too, that's why I wanted to talk about mechanics first, so some of those might make a little more sense. But if anyone has questions about what some of those might mean, let me know. We can talk about it. How about you, Mark?
I'm weirdly leaning towards the spider.
Okay, sure. I mean, I think that one makes sense. I would also say, like, theoretically, if you also wanted to be a whisper, that would be okay. Like, there's nothing wrong with that. But spider, I think, could be a good choice too, because a spider is a devious mastermind. So spider starts with 1 in study and 2 in consort. And I think consort in that context would probably mostly be like, you know who to talk to about something. And so that is not necessarily an obvious match for Nedry as you've played so far, but we could play it that way, right? Like in terms of knowing where to look, where to get information and that sort of thing. Like, or for that matter, this could be an example of one where if we think that does not fit, we could change it.
Yeah, I mean we got points to spend, but I was looking at survey rather than consort, because the survey one is you observe the situation, and anticipate outcomes. Now I can spend points on that anyway, but
right, but it might make sense if we want to say, rather than the traditional Blades in the Dark spider that is all about having like a network of contacts, because that doesn't necessarily make as much sense for Nedry, maybe we say that instead you're using the spider playbook, but instead of taking 2 points in consort, you're taking 2 points in survey instead.
yeah,
Yeah, we could do that.
yeah.
Oh, you know what? I didn't tell you guys. But in Roll20, I set up a new game where you can have these sheets electronically.
Oh.
So I think we don't necessarily need to get into doing that right this second. But if you figure out what you're going to want, you'll be able to create that electronically and do rolls from that in Roll20. But because I forgot
That's
to
cool.
say that in advance, we don't need to spend time setting that up right now. But yeah, that makes perfect sense. And so if anyone else for their playbook feels like those starting points, you'd want to tweak those a little bit, let me know, because that's perfectly acceptable, especially under the circumstances. And so everyone would want to, start with 3. You're going to add 4 until you have 7 dots in something, with none of them having more than 2. And then you choose 1 special ability. And then once everyone has that, I'm going to give you basically 4 points worth of advancement. But let's get everybody to that starting place first, just so we don't get ahead of ourselves too much. Does anyone have any questions or have a special ability picked out that you're interested in using there?
I picked out the occultist special ability.
Okay, so let's see. That one is the secret ways to consort with ancient powers, forgotten gods, or demons. Yeah, once you've consorted with one, you get +1 to command cultists who worship it. Okay, cool. Yeah,
So we get 1 special ability
to start.
to start.
Yeah.
Ooh, I think bodyguard would probably fit best with
Yeah.
Zinhorn.
When you protect a teammate, you take +1 to your resistance roll. And when you gather info to anticipate possible threats in a current situation, you get +1 effect. So, like, for example, if someone else's gather information roll in a certain circumstance with a threat would be, they would get a standard effect, you would get a great effect. And then likewise, if you would be, you're trying to protect someone from a physical threat, you get 1 more die when you roll to resist the consequence for them. So yeah, that makes sense to as a protection sort of thing. Yeah.
Okay.
I am trying to decide between Cloak and Dagger or Mesmerism because they both kind of make sense.
Mm-hmm. Well, you're
Lynn.
going to have the opportunity to maybe get an additional one. So you can, if you're just can't decide, you can potentially get both. But so Cloak and Dagger would be when you use a disguise or other form of covert misdirection, you get a +1 die to rolls to confuse or deflect suspicion. Makes sense for Carolina. When you throw off your disguise, the resulting surprise gives you the initiative in the situation. And then Mesmerism was when you sway someone, you may cause them to forget that it's happened until they next interact with you. Yeah, I think both of those seem fun.
I mean, like looking into a mirror, the ability to always tell when someone is lying is really tempting. But I think the other two make more sense for who Lynn is.
Well, and also don't forget that, the magic items that you got from the Archfey, as I mentioned, I was kind of already leaning towards not having them be traditional D&D magical items. And so all the more remember that your characters have those too, and we can play that into just like any other gear that you have. It would be, so if, like, for example, the boot that lets you retrace people's steps is probably going to be the most helpful if you're using it for a hunt roll, right? Because that is tracking someone, right? But that's not to say that it couldn't be used also for things like gather information or, it could be whatever. It's just a matter of any time you feel like it would be helpful, you can use it in that circumstance. Or sometimes it'll just make sense passively in the fiction, like, Carolina's ability to understand languages. Have you got a first one picked, Mark?
Yeah, I mean the special abilities are one of the reasons I like the spider one.
Yeah.
But I think I'd start with Mastermind.
Okay.
because both parts of it. You may
Yeah.
expend your special armor to protect a teammate, or to push yourself when you gather information or work on a long-term project. Like that,
Right.
definitely sounds like Indigo.
Yeah, so the special armor in this circumstance, and I think every playbook has one of the special abilities that talks about special armor. What that means is that you essentially have 3 boxes of, your special armor to work with, that you can, anytime you want, mark one of those boxes to, so when you want to protect a teammate by taking one of their consequences for them, you can mark that box to give yourself. Let's see. Hang on. To protect a teammate or to. Hang on. Let me double check with that protect, because I feel like I'm maybe missing one part of it for how the armor would let you do that. But yeah, so in any case, yeah, the ability, helps to protect or, so when you normally would, okay, yeah. So I think in this context, what it would be is normally to protect a teammate, if you want to resist the consequence, it costs you stress, right? Well, your special armor, because it's in the mastermind, it would essentially, we would say, how in the fiction did you think of something that will eliminate or reduce that consequence? And so you mark that special armor box instead of taking stress. But you can only do it so many times, right? But then likewise, if you want to push yourself, normally you have to mark 2 stress to push yourself for rolls, whereas you can mark that one of those boxes instead. And I notice on the sheet here, it says armor uses, and it's like there's one that says armor, one that says heavy, and one that says special. But I believe the special armor is always supposed to have 3 uses. Let me see if I can find where it says that specifically, unless I'm misremembering. Let's see. Special armor. Can type. Okay, special armor. Some special abilities refer to your special armor. Each character sheet has a set of 3 boxes to track usage of armor, standard, heavy, and special. If you have any abilities that use your special, okay, so I was misremembering how that worked. So you have one box of special armor, but then you can tick that box to do the thing for that special ability. And of course, it doesn't mean that you can't protect someone or push yourself without that. It just means that one time you can avoid taking stress for it. And that might be something that would be a big deal if you, for example, can't afford to take any more stress. Okay. So if everyone has got their first their first 4 dots and their first special ability, I decided semi-arbitrarily that you would all get 4 advances worth of additional leveling up. That's the result of the fact that you're all high level adventurers already. And advancements are, where did there we go. Advancement on page 48. So normally when you get an advancement, you would have had to fill up your XP track by getting, so first of all, you're going to mark XP every time you make a desperate action roll, whether you succeed or fail. Anytime you're in a desperate position and make a roll, you get to mark XP for it. And then likewise, there's specific XP triggers on your character sheet based on the playbook that at the end of every session, we will ask if you did those things and you might get XP for it. And so when you fill up the XP track, you get an advancement. You're going to start with 4 advancements. And so what your advancements let you do is to, you can, where is it? So what you can do is either take, for each one, you can take an additional special ability, or you can add an additional action dot to one of the actions under that attribute. And then note that all of them have a thing on the bottom of the special abilities that says veteran. And what that means is you could choose a special ability from one of the other playbooks, but that costs you 3. Oh, wait, no. Is it cost you 3 or is it just like you can only do it 3 times?
It looks like it costs you 3.
That's what I was first saying, but let me double check
Yeah.
to make sure that's not true. Or let's see if I can find if it says that more definitively. Because certainly on the playbook, that's what it looks like it says. Okay. Okay. You may keep some of the special ability. That's changing a playbook. So, let's see. Veteran advance. Let's see. Yeah, I think that must be what that means. I'm not finding anywhere that makes it more clear. There are certain other things. Veteran advance. Because some of the other things that some of the playbooks, there's like you can have a ghost or a hull or a vampire playbooks. And let's see those. Those are saying like that you can't take those abilities by using a veteran advance, but it doesn't. Yeah, I'm going to say based on the way that the playbook looks, if you want to use 3 advances to pick something from another playbook, I will allow you to do that. But I think that's how that's supposed to work. But I would also say, for that matter, I would be willing in this context, because we are kind of tweaking to fit ourselves anyway, that if there was some special ability on some other playbook that you just thought was absolutely perfect, maybe we don't need to have it cost 3 of your 4 advances. Okay. Does anyone have any questions about assigning your advances? Do you know where you want to put them? Have anyone have any questions about that?
I'm still trying to get the little dots to fill in. Like,
oh well, I mean,
I'm lost. Sorry.
I think those PDFs are not necessarily gonna like I don't think those are designed to have them be like checkboxes or something. So I would say like write down where you want them, and then on the Roll20 version, it's easy to just click it.
Yeah, I'm a little overwhelmed with the new system. Like I can't even figure out where you mark experience.
Okay, it's all right. Like, don't worry about that. First of all, the experience is not going to be something that needs to happen right away anyway. But because you don't need to mark experience for now, because I'm just giving you have those advances
Right.
already. And then I'm looking on these sheets. I think these sheets, I think it might be intended to be those boxes up in the upper right. Because there's the stash and coin, and then 2 boxes, 2 tracks below that.
Ah, okay.
I believe that's probably what that's supposed to be.
Okay.
Actually, well, also there's like by playbook, there is. Oh, you know what? I think that's what it is. Where it says playbook, and there's a track of boxes there. I believe that's it. I believe that's where the experience XP is supposed to go.
So I get 4 dots.
Mm-hmm.
I would think like I would want hunt, wreck, and I don't know, maybe prowl.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So prowl is basically like being stealthy.
Yeah, I'm not really stealthy.
I mean, you could be if you put a dot
I
there.
could be.
But yeah, but that's what prowl is kind of about. finesse would be more classic, like dexterity, sleight of hand sorts of things, or
Yeah.
ranged attacks. Um, um, uh, I mean, I feel like I would think of Zinhorn as potentially being good at consort, like, like getting along with groups and fitting
Yeah.
in places.
So 1 in consort. Um,
Or
1
for that
in
matter,
rec.
attune we could flavor as your devotion to Rashama,
Okay.
like your magical ability to sort of connect with, and
So 1 in attune
the
and 1 in
divine.
hunt.
Mhm.
Okay, and that's my 4 dots.
Okay, so you said one in hunt, one in attune, one in rec, and then
1 in consort.
okay. And and remember, just in case you forgot, if you wanted, instead of putting the 4 dots, all of them in there, you could exchange one of those for taking another special ability.
All right, let me read the special abilities
Yeah,
again.
and for that matter, if you wanted to take 4 special abilities and not add any dots, you could also do that. Each
Okay.
one can be a dot in the attributes or a new special ability.
Okay.
And that's why, for example, I was saying if you wanted to use 3 of them to do a veteran thing, then you could. But I think we would probably not do it that way since we're tweaking these playbooks
Yeah.
anyway. Anyone else know where they want to put their advancements?
Did you say we get 4 initially and then
Yeah,
another 4?
So all of the playbooks start with 3 dots, right?
Right.
You would have 3 dots, and then when you add your starting points, you're adding 4, so you would have 7 dots and 1 special ability.
Okay.
And so, and when you add those to start, you can only have up to 2 in something. But when you're adding the new ones, you could add up, make the go up to 4. So, for example, if Indigo for survey or study wanted to add 2 of them to survey to make it a 4, you could do that.
So I think I'm going to do 1 in study, 1 in survey, 1 in finesse, and 1 in prowl. And then I'll take cloak and dagger.
Okay. And Cloak and Dagger was, I think we said what it was. Cloak and Dagger was the one where they forget you if you're successful. Is that?
You get a +1 dice to rolls to confuse or deflect.
Oh, right. Yeah. And Mesmerism was the other one that you were taking before.
Right.
Okay, cool. All right. So, does everyone kind of feel like they've got what they want, or anyone still have questions or want to discuss how any of those would work, or?
So I got rid of attunement and I picked special abilities vigorous.
Okay.
So I will heal faster.
Yeah.
And what do I do with the enhancements?
With the enhancements?
You said we get 4 enhancements.
Oh, yeah.
Guess
No,
where?
so that's what I was saying. So, like, you started by adding the original 4 dots and picking 1 special ability, and then
Right.
giving you 4 more that it was what you just did. That's the 4
Oh,
advancements.
okay. All right. So we started with 4, so I get to add another 4.
Okay. Yes. So,
Okay.
no. Okay. So the cutter starts with 2 in skirmish and 1 in command.
Right.
To begin with, you add 4 more dots.
Right.
And then the advancements we were talking, I thought you had done that already.
No, I hadn't.
Okay, well, that I'm glad we
So I
clarified
add
it.
a total of 8.
Yes. So
Got it.
what
Okay.
everybody should have, if you add up all of the dots and all of the special abilities you should have 12.
11.
Well, you start with 3. Oh, no, you're right. 11. You start with 3 and add 4 and then add 4. No, okay, but no. So it is 12 because you start with 3 dots, then you add 4 dots and 1 special ability,
Right.
and then you're adding 4 more of either.
12. Okay.
Yeah. All right. So does everyone feel like you've got a position there? Or you can, and also feel free to keep tweaking it. You know, like you don't have to permanently decide right this second.
Okay.
All right. So the character creation. So we already you've got all of that stuff. And then some of these other things, like the close friend and rival, I would say we're not going to do that part the way they have it written, because you're starting with some folks, but then you're also like, you're going to a new location where you don't necessarily know anybody. Right? But what we could potentially, like, those are designed to just like enmesh the characters into a setting, right? But you're going to a new place. You wouldn't have existing people to go in those spots. So that strange friends section, we're gonna, well, or the friends section where it's, and all of them, it's called something different for each playbook. It would be, ignore that. The bit where it says items and load. Basically you are, you have the stuff that you have. But what I would also allow is, based on the playbook you have, the other things there, you can also kind of have those, you know what I mean? Kind of just like, because it's all going to be gear, right? It's going to be, you declare whatever it is that you want. But so, for example, note on some of these where, for Cutter, for example, under items, it says like fine hand weapon or fine heavy weapon. What that means is that a fine weapon is going to have +1 effect compared to whatever a comparable non-fine weapon would be, right? So whatever roll you're doing, if a regular sword would have a standard effect, a fine sword will have a great effect, right?
Okay.
Likewise, any of those other things, like a scary weapon is going to be, if it makes sense under the circumstances, a scary weapon might give you more effect if it's against a subject that might tend to be scared of it, for example, right? Or if someone's coming after you, but you pull out a scary weapon, maybe it makes your position risky instead of desperate, because they're like suddenly hesitating, right? Like that would be how to interpret some of those sorts of things. But so generally speaking, what I would say is all of that stays as undeclared gear based on your load until you say what it is. And when you say what it is, we will determine how to interpret it in the mechanics here. But I think what we can imagine is if you're all in on a score and we have Garland wanting to pull out Zinhorn's freezing drill spear, right? We can interpret based on knowing what that is, what the effect is. We don't have to convert everything, right? We don't have to say that is a fine hand weapon, even though probably that is what we would choose for it to be, right?
Right.
But that is, yeah.
If he's being attacked by a fish, it looks like a seafood fork, so it could be a scary weapon.
Yeah. So in any case, what I would say is your characters have the stuff that you have on your D&D sheet. And if you ever pull something out, we will figure out how many load spots that takes up. And we would interpret how you use it based on the fictional circumstances. Right?
Okay.
By the same token, the characters that you have spells that you can cast, we would do the same thing. It's like if what you say is, I would want my character to be casting this spell in this circumstance, we would describe what that looks like in the circumstance, and we would figure out what role that means and what the circumstances and everything would be as a result. Right? So I don't
Mm-hmm.
want to take your abilities away from you. It's just that we're going to resolve everything through the Blades in the Dark mechanics rather than the D&D mechanics. Does that all
Okay.
make sense? We'll have to figure out some of that as we go. Okay. So then one of the things that we're going to do that is a little different, well, none of the stuff that we've done so far is different. One of the key things in Blades in the Dark for these characters is your character has to have a vice. And a vice is the means by which you remove stress during downtime. And part of the fun is that whatever your choice of vice is, you need to have a place where you can do it. And you also, there's a risk that you can overindulge and cause a problem as a result. Right? And so I would like to encourage us to use this mechanic too, even if it potentially wasn't something you had previously thought of your character having as a particular vice. But you can all choose those. And so the choices are, let me pull the list up here. Vices. Yeah, there we go. So everyone, where is that list of? I'm not finding the list I was looking for, but so the choice of vices, there's faith, gambling, luxury, obligation, pleasure, stupor, weird, and we can kind of interpret a lot of those as we like. But the basic mechanic is that when you're doing your downtime, as a downtime action, you can indulge your vice. And you're going to, the effectiveness of your indulgence depends on your character's worst attribute rating. So insight, prowess, or resolve, whichever of those three has the fewest number in it, right, is what you roll. And so you're going to, let's say it's going to be just a 1d6. You would roll that, and however many, whatever you roll on that d6 is how much stress you remove. But there's always a risk that, like, let's say you have 4 stress, but you roll a 6, and you would be removing more stress than you have. What that does is you have overindulged, which means that you're going to, A, either gain a new entanglement, a new complication for your gang, or you gain heat because you're bragging, or your character vanishes for a few weeks. Play a different character until this one returns from their bender. Or tapped, meaning that current purveyor says you can't go there anymore and you would have to find somewhere else. And so that is that is how that mechanic works. But so what I would encourage, let's see, I'm trying to find, like, trying to find the place where choose your vice. Okay, so this is what I was looking for. Page 55 is where this is. The different types of vice is like faith, you're dedicated to an unseen power, forgotten god, ancestor, etc. Gambling, you crave games of chance, betting on sporting events, etc. Luxury, expensive or ostentatious displays of opulence. Obligation, you're devoted to a family, a cause, an organization, a charity, etc. Pleasure, gratification from lovers, food, drink, drugs, art, theater, etc. Stupor would be you seek.
Hi, that one is me.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Stupor is you seek oblivion in the abuse of drugs, drinking to excess, getting beaten to a pulp in the fighting pits, etc. Or weird, you experiment with strange essences, consort with rogue spirits, observe bizarre rituals or taboos, etc. I see Mark nodding at that one.
I think we found Indigo. Yeah.
So basically, you're going to choose your vice, and so then when we do downtime activities to relieve the stress from your scores, that is how we're going to resolve that mechanic. Is that we'll come up with a little scene of what you're doing to go do it, and then we will roll to see how well it works, and then potentially continue the scene based on the outcome. Make sense? All right. So the last little bit here of character creation is record your name, alias, and look. But I think in some of these cases, some of that is, based on your existing character, and you've got aliases already. But what I would encourage you to do between now and next time is, we know what Nedry looks like and how he dresses and how he acts. What about Indigo, etc.? So, like, think about what your current scoundrel look is.
There was another thing that occurred to me. In the material plane, we're known as the pocket protectors, but we're protecting our names. So what is our name as a group here? So our gang name slash, I don't know what the other term would be, but our
Crew.
So the pocket protectors become something.
What's phase 2?
There is no phase 2. Jump directly to phase 3.
Make profit.
That's 4.
No, that's phase 3.
Something profit.
Phase 1 is underpants, is steal underpants.
Yeah.
Phase 3 is make profit. And they're always saying, what's phase 2?
Yeah.
And nobody has an answer.
Man, steel underpants sound really, really uncomfortable.
Yes. So
All
anyway,
those chastity belts.
yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
So I think we've kind of gone through all of your basic characters, and I think that's been great, and I'm looking forward to all of that. But so I wanted to try to this is a little bit of a future looking thing, because we can decide how much of this to put on screen when we return to the fiction proper, right? But we presume that we are going to resume the story as the pocket protectors are traveling to this location. And I'll give you the heads up that basically you're going to be given transport, but told if you take this transport all the way there, it'll get you all the way there, but it potentially attracts a lot of attention, meaning people will recognize the means of transport if you go all the way there. But it's up to you how much further out you want to try to stop, right? And so I think in some ways, what we might actually consider here is that your first score, so to speak, is going to be, infiltrating this place without getting like discovered or spotted, and finding a place to be your new hangout. That's kind of what I'm thinking. Does that make sense? But one of the other pieces that we might engage with as it moves forward, and you don't necessarily have to decide this definitively right now, is whether or not you want to build a crew. Because as previously mentioned, having a crew does give you mechanical benefits. And so it is entirely up to you if you feel like you want to just stay as a lean, mean team, the 4 of you, and then, Paradise and Aster and Buster, right? If you want to stay and say that's your crew, we can do that. And in fact, we can even still say that's your crew. It'll be a lower tier crew, which means it limits some of the things that your crew can do. But you can have that be your crew, and you can decide what kind of crew you are and do some of those mechanical things with that. But you might also consider, and I want to make sure that you're aware it's an option, is that when you get there and you start getting a feel of the place, that's when I think we want to start thinking about I want you to know it's an option that you could potentially start saying. Essentially, what the question you have to answer for yourselves in character is, you've been granted the ability to not be seen as a powerful team of adventurers who wants to steal the diamond, right?
Right.
So you've been given the ability to not be that. But what are you instead? If you show up and someone says, "Hey, who are you and why are you here?" what are you going to say? Right? So the idea is you probably want to actually try to come up with the cover story for why you're there and why you might be there for a little while. Right? Now, this could be simple. You could theoretically all come in and all say individually, like come in one at a time and not attract attention because you don't come in as a group and you're trying to pretend you're not with each other. You could do that. Or you could like set yourself up as like, no, we are going to be a new salvaging operation. Right? You could say that you are, you're like a criminal gang, right? You could do anything you want is the point. But I think what you as a group need to decide, and again, it doesn't have to be right this second, but by the time you're going to actually arrive there and start talking to people, you probably ought to be on the same page as far as what the story is. Right? And so what I'm thinking is that we will have as our first score be a relatively simple one just to kind of test out the mechanics, where I'm thinking that the goal is going to be, get in without attracting too much attention and find a place to be your hideout. All right?
Okay.
Our headquarters.
Hangout. Yeah, headquarters. Right.
Yeah.
And so what that'll mean is, you'll decide what's your approach. How are you getting in? And you can do some gather information rolls as a result. And so we're going to start using the mechanics, but in the fiction, think about things like, for example, when we look at the different types of crews, right? The crews have different abilities that they can do and different upgrades that they can get. So like in this same PDF that has the sheets, like, so for example, the assassins, have abilities like, if your crew of assassins has the deadly special ability, every PC may add +1 action rating to hunt, prowl, or skirmish. And so that immediately gives all of you the equivalent of an advantage on your character sheet, although needing to be in one of those three things, right? So, I mean, some of these abilities, like deciding what kind of crew you are, like it makes a difference. And like I said, you can make your crew, you would be starting with the 7 of you, and you'd be pretty low level, like you're powerful, but you don't have any rep, people don't know you. You don't have a lot of people, so you'd be starting smaller, but if you get bigger and you gain more reputation, you do more jobs, you can gain access to more abilities that might help you with the tougher jobs, right?
And I suggest that we kind of step into the meta a little bit and just indulge in whatever the system offers, just to go as far as it'll take us to really have the full experience. It's going to feel weird because it's not the kind of thing we've done so far, but it kind of finding those bridges to going like, you know what, we need to solve this problem. It's bigger than us. Let's get bigger. I think it'd be fun.
So you're saying I should start a cult?
Absolutely.
Well,
in this context, absolutely.
Well, so for example, if the cult takes the Bound in Darkness special ability, you can use teamwork with any cult member regardless of the distance separating you. By taking 1 stress, your whispered message is heard by every cultist. So
and actually, you know what? I'll start a cult as well, a cult of information.
Yeah. Well, so I guess what I want to also, I want to echo what Mark is saying, but I would also say that, like, in the fiction, I think we all know that it has been an item of concern to everybody, I think, of she's got a thing that lets her see into the future. How do you steal that? It seems like a real problem, right? Well, I would encourage you to think big. It is a tough problem, and I want it to be hard. And so the more resources you can call to bear, the better chance you're going to have. And that includes gathering allies to your side. And there are going to be different factions when you arrive there. So choosing who to align with and who you might make enemies of is also going to play into it. So I'm excited to try to engage with some of these mechanics, but I also want to be open to any questions or concerns that anyone might have, because I know it's a lot of new stuff to a game that we've been rolling along on. So if anyone is feeling anxiety about that, please do let me know. And we can do that off stream too if we want to have those conversations. But that's of course always true. I hope that you can you can always do that. But so the other thing is to think about it in terms of tone. Like a lot of Blades in the Dark is designed to be a little bit grimmer and grittier, but we don't have to necessarily have it be like that. But I would encourage us to think of it a little bit more down in the dirt, if that makes sense. As a subtle connotation difference between that and gritty. But yeah, you're going to be going down to a messy, complicated place where you are, going to have to fit in if you want to not just be spotted. And so specifically speaking, the heat rating for your crew is going to be reflective of how much attention the Lady Despair is paying to you. And so the more attention, the more trouble that she's potentially going to send your way when you do things, and perhaps the more preparation she's going to make to prevent you from stealing her thing. So keeping the heat level down is going to be useful. But also there might be other things where like you might gain a little more attention, but now that you have a crew of mermaids that has your back, maybe that's worth it. Right? And so I want to encourage you to be aware of those sorts of things as possibilities that are built into the game system as intended mechanics. But you can also keep it small if that is what makes sense, if you feel like that's what the characters would do. But I think there's also the classic storytelling archetypes of you go to the town that's oppressed by a local despot, and part of the thing is not just the adventurers going in and killing the despot by themselves, but rallying the townsfolk to rise up, right? Like it's all of those things. And and sometimes it might be that like there's the local gang that doesn't like you muscling in on their turf, and you might have to deal with them a little bit. But so I hope I'm really excited to be exploring this new system, especially when I feel like it fits so neatly into the broader story that we've already been telling. And so that's why I'm really excited that you've all agreed to do this experiment with me, and I hope you're excited too.
Yeah, I think it's the opportunity that you've crafted in the idea that we're in the Feywild. We've been given different names. The Feywild is weird. Mm-hmm. It just starts at weird and goes strange from there. Different kind of rules. The real world doesn't work the same way. Gives that freedom to just go, you know what? This little mini game's going to be a different kind of experience. Mm-hmm. And then at the end, it's kind of like, well, that was the weird thing. Now we've left behind an empire, or hey, the place is burning, or hey, we barely got away from that. But now we've got, the motivation to leave it behind and go to the next crazy thing.
And it is fully my intention that we're going to play out this arc, and it's going to go however it goes. But that once we do, my expectation is we would return to D&D, and you probably would level up. Assuming that you actually don't just run away immediately. Okay, so I think we kind of. I guess I meant to. We can talk a little bit more about like what kind of crew you would want to be, but I think we would probably not establish that in fiction until you've found your headquarters. So like we would do that first score. And then as part of that first downtime, we would decide those things. But you can maybe think in advance about which sort of crew you feel like makes sense.
What I would suggest to help us along is I like the fact that you give us this initial score, but I think for the first couple of times we go through this, as we're doing our downtime and as we're doing our research, you might say there seem to be these scores you can go after.
Yeah.
So you kind of
Oh yeah.
proactively do that. I think later on, we're definitely going to want to design our own scores, but I think there's so much new here. A little bit of that hand holding in the beginning would be appreciated.
100%. That's absolutely the plan. And so you would always have your ability to veer off of any trails that I lay out for you, but there's definitely going to be trails to follow if that helps.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because I am feeling, even though if you check the book, my name is in the back. I backed the Kickstarter for this thing, but I still really haven't had a chance to engage with it. So there's still a lot of new things and a different structure. And finding that rhythm is the most critical thing, trying to go like, oh, how do we, at least we kind of know our characters. We know who we are. So we don't have to discover that as well. But I think some acknowledgement too in the fiction that we also see ourselves changing. We also see like, hey, I feel different here. And kind of like, well, that's what the Feywild does. It changes you as much as you change it. So
yeah, I absolutely, especially under the circumstances that you have been magically granted new identities and you're going to a completely different place. It's entirely divorced from everything you were doing before. I would encourage you to think about what effect that has on your character. And I'm not telling you that it changes them, but I'm asking you if it does. Right? So you think about that. I think the last other little piece I was going to mention is I kind of touched on it briefly, but Evan and Ivy and Buster are going to be cohorts. And page 96 in the book is where they talk about cohorts. And so, for example, a cohort could be a single NPC, or it could be a gang. You could recruit a gang as a new cohort, and that would be part, and that's how you would treat it. And so there's mechanics for that, but they would probably be like, you can create an expert. So an expert's type, a cohort is a gang or an expert who works for your crew to recruit a new cohort, spend 2 upgrades, and create them using the process below. And so that would be if you have gotten gang crew upgrades that you could recruit in that way. But you're going to start with these 3 because they're already with you. And so, as mentioned, we just decide in the fiction what they are doing, and the way they help mechanically is, depending on what it is that they are doing, they are going to fictionally adjust the circumstances of each of your roles. They don't make their own roles. They only affect your roles, but they will potentially affect the position or effect level of your roles in ways that make sense. So part of the expert thing that I think will be fun to assign for the 3 of them is that when you create a cohort, you should give them 1 or 2 edges and an equal number of flaws. And so, for example, edges could be fearsome, independent, loyal, or tenacious. Flaws could be principled, like in the sense they have an ethic or values that it won't betray, like then they won't necessarily do what you tell them if it goes against their code, or savage, or unreliable, or wild, right? And so I think in those circumstances, it kind of makes it a little, we've got established characters, right? So some of those things are intended to be like, if you don't know who this person is, this helps you decide. But we've got, characters. So I think in this circumstance, that's how that's all going to work. And then likewise, cohorts can take damage, right? They can take harm as a consequence, right? So it might be, for example, that if Garland asks Aster to attack an enemy with them, and the 2 of them are attacking, but you roll a failure, the consequence might be that Evan takes the harm, right? And so, but cohort harm works a little differently than yours. That you would have, like they have stages basically where they would be weakened, meaning they have reduced effect, impaired, where they operate with reduced quality, or broken, they can't do anything till they recover, or, dead. Using a cohort, one of the other things that you can do is if you want them to go off and do something on their own instead of just helping with what you're doing, you roll command to send them off for that. And so that's that's how that works. Or you can oversee it by doing it as a group action. So that's how that works. And I'll kind of make sure I've got whatever stats they need set up for that. And I think that's all the stuff that I wanted to cover. Anyone have any other questions? Feel free, of course, to if you think of some later, that's fine too. And then I'm sure there'll be plenty once we actually start. But I think we've covered the main ground.
A question about clocks.
Mm-hmm.
So clocks are great for tracking all kinds of things.
Yes.
Are there hidden clocks? Is that a target for an investigation, for example, is to uncover a clock? Is that a part of the mechanics, or are all clocks known?
They could go either way, although generally I think the game is designed that players know all clocks, but the characters might not.
Okay.
Right? So for example, if I set up a clock that says how long until you're noticed by the security guards, right? The characters don't know how many ticks that clock is, right? But I might tell you that it's a 4-tick clock. And so that would be something that you as the players know, but the characters don't know how many ticks until it fills, right? And so I think that's my plan, is that I'm not going to keep clocks secret from you. But you have to decide whether it makes sense for your character to be aware of something progressing or not. Right?
What are the rest of you guys thinking about, like, what our cover should be when we get there?
I think it's something that we should discuss, like, as a group throughout the week. That's like an on-the-spot kind of question.
Okay. Well,
Well,
I just
it'll
wanted
just
to know if
lead to, like,
anyone.
That's exactly why I wanted to
any
mention
thoughts?
it this week, and
Yeah.
so that I
Yeah.
didn't have to spring it on you next week, because it's one of those questions where there's no blame here, but it's the sort of thing where it's one of those questions that, like, you don't necessarily think about it until it's put to you, and then it realizes, like, oh yeah, I probably should have thought of that. You
Alright.
just did a lot of work to magically get a secret identity, and you're going to show up and they're going to say, who are you? What do you want?
Right.
And you probably don't want to say, we're here to steal the diamond from the Lady Despair.
Or
I mean,
do
you could say that. I'm not sure I would advise it, but
It's a one-stage clock. Look at that.
Oh, we're dead.
That's all right. We'll get better.
But yeah, I think the cover story, just like it was saying, like, the Pocket Protectors is our name in the material world, but we're different people here with a different mission, and kind of, I think a name will also help us solidify that notion.
right. And I think that it is really interesting to play with the friction there. You know what I mean? Like, on the one hand, entirely new characters doing a different thing in a different location, but also still underneath who you were before. Like, I think playing with those two things together is fun.
Well, of course, it's a friction-first system, right?
Yeah. Okay. Well, so I think if no one has any more questions, then maybe we can call it to a close a little bit early this evening. But the plan would be that next time we will resume the morning after that night in the Feywild retreat. You'd be, perhaps waking up a little differently, given the opportunity to do a wardrobe change if you see fit, and and you would potentially be given the opportunity to make some gather information rolls to decide what is your approach for the first engagement roll.
I think Lynn needs a fedora hat and a pinstripe suit.
Well, since Primrose is kind of a feminine name, I don't know that that's going to work for me.
Well, you could play against that though, right? You know, like a big guy gets called tiny. You know, like it's like
Boy named Sue, that kind of thing.
Yeah. Exactly.
the world is your oyster. You're going down there where they have a lot of them. So
Wait. There's a
One of
lot of
them's
oysters
yours.
down there, and,
Yeah.
and one of them
Yep.
and it's
one
the
of them has a
world.
pearl that we want, and
Yeah.
that's sure. There's a metaphor there somewhere. Keep digging.
Yep.
Yeah. So, before next week, think about wardrobe change, think about cover story, and then if you see fit as a group, potentially talk about like what is the basic, like, because as I mentioned with the engagement role, you're going to choose, is this assault, deception, stealth, occult, social, or transport. Transport is carry cargo or people through danger, which you could potentially have it, like, you could decide that that's kind of how you would want to interpret it, right? So you just decide as a just a broad category, which of those is the best descriptor of what you're planning to do. Although in some cases, I think deception probably makes the most sense to start, but it's entirely up to you to make that final decision. Just deception seems like it's the most straightforward based on you have false identities you're sneaking in with a lie about why you're there, right? But you could decide to have it be any of those if you feel like you have a reason or a detail or a plan for why that would be.
Okay. So I guess we'll discuss it during the week.
Yep. All right. I'm excited, everybody. So we will leave it there for now, and we will return next week for more adventure on so many levels or so many blades in the dark.
Many blades and levels.
So much dark. Fairy blades.